I'm only living once in this body, at least, what is something that's going to make the world a better place? And thought about meditation. It's a practice that changed my life. One of the other silver linings is people and organizations realize the importance of mental health now much more than ever.
Hey, Stephen, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Thanks, Sam. Excited to be here with you.
Most certainly. Every entrepreneur has an interesting story of how they overcame obstacles to become an entrepreneur. I was looking through your life journey, and you founded multiple companies and grew them very rapidly through acquisitions and roll-ups and things of that nature. And now you're on to building a SaaS plus service model business. So you've pivoted a lot and you've changed business models multiple times. So you definitely have a lot of entrepreneurial experience. So can you share with our audience a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Queens and always had the desire to build and hustle. Like money was something that my family didn't really have much of growing up, but we were surrounded by some interesting things and some interesting people making money. And at a very young age, actually, my little brother was the best man at my wedding a few months ago. And he told the story of our first business together, which was Steve's snow removal. So I was 13 and he was 8. And he said it was a perfect division of labor. I was Steve, the face of the business, and he was the snow removal part. And the truth is we were always doing things to try to make money and try to build. And after college, moving to the more professional side of it, I joined a company called the Award Group. And the Award Group was run by two gentlemen in their 70s. They wanted somebody who could come in and run one particular division which focused on nonprofits. And that was really interesting to me from an emotional standpoint, the idea of how can we help nonprofits raise more money by celebrating and recognizing their donors. And so started doing that, and then very quickly started to get requests from my friends who were all doing investment banking. That was like the job to do back in 2001 when I graduated, for this really random type of award called deal toys, as we joked about before, right? These are lucite or tombstones. They're basically gifts that investment banks give to their clients when they close a transaction. And so it's the junior analyst, the basically recent college grad, who's in charge of procuring these. And all my friends were recent college grads, as was I. And so that business started growing. And so over the next few years, that business grew very rapidly. And I ended up saying, hey, I think there's an opportunity to really build this. Whereas those two gentlemen who I mentioned, who had hired me, they were now in their mid 70s. And so they had a different risk profile that I did. And I said, great, let me buy this. So I bought the division in a management buyout. This is October 2002. The peak of the stock market. Nobody knew it. October 2000. I started in October 2002. Nobody knew it at the time, but basically we had a bunch of good months and then the market gave out. And obviously, I'm guessing we're close to around the same age, plus or minus. You probably remember those times. There was a lot of uncertainty about what would happen. And I had just purchased a business. I was in a non-compete where I could only work with investment banks. So that was really challenging because there were no deals happening. Lehman Brothers, Bear, everything was going under. There was a lot of uncertainty, but we cut costs really quickly, and that positioned us well. We ended up consolidating the industry. So we rolled up the second, third, and fourth largest companies in the space, along with a few independents. And then when the market came back a few years later, we opened offices in London, Sydney, Hong Kong, Montreal, and Taiwan. And then a few years later, I ended up selling the company. And at that point, we had about a 40% market share globally. We had about 70 employees around the world. So still a small company, but a big company within that little space. So that was sort of 12 years from 2002 to 2014, but many chapters, right? The Award Group one, the Icon one, that was what it was called when I first spun off. And then Altrum was what it was called when we consolidated everything. And then had some time off to try to figure out what I wanted to do next. And that was an interesting time. So happy to double click in there and tell you about it. But to stay high level for now, I basically had no idea what I wanted to do, but recognized I wanted to build a big business and I wanted to do something that mattered. Like I was looking at these really interesting business opportunities that were fascinating intellectually, but didn't appeal to like my heart at all. I was like, okay, if I'm only living once in this body, at least, what is something that's going to make the world a better place? And thought about meditation. It's a practice that changed my life, which I'm also happy to go into more detail about. And then in 2015, in February 2015, launched Journey with this mission of helping all people live happier, healthier, less stressed lives. So it's been 8 years now building Journey, and yeah, happy to spend more time wherever you see fit.
Yeah, I think when you built 2015, this employee engagement and health and wellness application or this company, I don't think this topic of wellness and employee health and all of those things were even a conversation. It was pretty much a brand new industry. We certainly want to dwell on those things, but if I can go back to the icon and obviously building the Altrim as a company, you've had to do a lot of pivoting. Like you said, you had a non-compete, you basically had a management buyout. So you get this business, and in less than a year into it, now all of a sudden you have this major decision to make. Like the industry as you knew it is not going to be around. I think you're even questioning, well, if these financial organizations are all failing, why would there even be a need for deal toys, right? The toys to send to people to recognize them for having won deals and whatnot. So what were some serious decisions we had to make? And then when did the idea of finding all those competitors and rolling up all those companies into what ultimately become Altrim?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I had a partner in the business, my CFO, a guy named Brian Miller, who I don't know how old he is now, but I guess back then I was in my 20s, early 30s, and he had at least a decade on me. And he had just been around more. And so while I was this hard charging CEO, and the hat that I wear most naturally is a sales hat, and I'm very optimistic, as a lot of entrepreneurs are, and saying, hey, I'm going to do this crazy thing called start a business. He was on the other side. He had seen businesses come and go, grow and fail. And so he was able to say, hey, I think we need to really buckle down and get ready for what's about to come. And so we cut costs quickly, right? We were like, okay, we don't know if this is going to come back. And if it is, how soon? So that was like the first decision. Then there was a question around, what do we do to survive? And I was like, I've put in enough of my energy and life and money into this business. I want to stay with it. I want to see if we can make it work. And so I had another partner named Bernard Bolduc, who ran the factory where we manufactured a lot of the physical goods up in Canada. And so he was great because, unlike me, where I was competing hand to hand with all these other companies, and there weren't like bad relations, but there just weren't really any relations. He had good relationships because he was manufacturing for several companies. So he was able to leverage that and work with both Brian and I to paint the vision of what this could be if we were able to consolidate everything under one roof. And so the numbers made sense. We were able to find a way to make it work. These were challenging times that called for, what's the expression, like necessity is the mother of invention. We would have, but none of the other companies would have said, yes, this is what we want. What were you going to do? And so it just made a lot of sense. And then we were able to consolidate, cut a lot of cost out of the system, and then the market turned and came back.
Yeah. And so obviously, like you said, you're in your early 20s, you started this new company. You didn't know about facing such drastic economic downturn in the industry as a whole. So how did like acquisition, was it even a thought in your mind when you started? Okay, this is how, I know you said with this new company, you started a journey. You wanted to build a big company, or I went into it with that idea of, I want to build something big. But were you always had the idea of acquisition as a way of growth in the early days?
Yeah, it was something that made a lot of sense. I first purchased my company from the parent company, from the award group. So I was already familiar with those types of transactions. And so at the time, I was very into reading about business books and seeing everything and talking to different folks. And I was in a CEO group. And so there was a lot of, it wasn't like with Journey, I started Journey from scratch, raised money, etc. With this, it was, I purchased it in a management buyout. And so the idea of could we acquire other businesses was always there for me. And the market itself was not great when it was like this bull market. Everyone was doing well, everyone was making money. But once that turned, then it changed. And the industry was just ripe for consolidation because it was a lot of legacy mom and pop type shops that had just been around for 30 years or 25 years with the same owner. And so putting it together and saying, let's cut a lot of the costs out of the system, let's streamline things, made a lot of sense. And it also helped quite a lot when going to buyers, meaning like back in the day, the Merrill Lynch's, the Goldman Sachs's, the Morgan Stanley's, our clients, and saying, hey, we can actually save you quite a lot from anyone else who's still in the space because we have economies of scale that nobody else has.
And the funny thing is, like, you're the new kid on the block, right? You just got into the industry. There were guys who were way ahead of you who may have had the financial means to buy out the other players, but you were the first to think about that as a strategy and leverage that to observe all those competitors and get the economies of scale so you could scale, which is funny because I've seen Like you said, the opposite side of it is like the guys that's been around, right? They just thought this market is just going to stay the way it is. They're just going to thrive and grow, but they were not prepared to face the challenges. And then when something hit, like COVID scenario, where there were a lot of companies during COVID weren't prepared for something like that, and then they were sold for pennies on a dollar because they had to get out of it. They had assets that were stuck, and they wanted to release as much cash as they can and either just run away from the problems by just exiting. And some of them actually had to do that as a strategy. Did you see some of those people were surprised when you approached them to buy them out, that
Yeah,
they could have been in a much better place if they had been prepared?
I think we were fortunate because whether it was Brian, who had been in a number of industries, or Bernard, who was looking at the industry from a different perspective, a lot of the other CEOs who were like me were just looking at it at one level, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
being able to see, and many of these folks have been in that particular industry for many years. And
Mm-hmm.
so they'd seen ups and downs, but never a down like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And never something that was, wow, investment banks are closing at scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is an existential risk to the whole thing. And so they just didn't cut costs as quickly. They didn't see it quite as clearly. And part of that, I think, is it was just one of those things where like they didn't see the possibility of that. And there's
Mm-hmm.
like a quote in Zen, which I'll mess up, but the basic gist of it is like, in the expert's mind, there are no possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are many, right? The
Mm-hmm.
basic idea being, oh, if you're an expert, then you can't see all of these things. But if you're brand new, you have that beginner's mind and approach to it. And so I think that helped us, the whole industry.
Most certainly, which obviously you've learned a lot during that downturn. And then you obviously successfully exited that company. And then you said you took a little time off and started thinking about some new ideas. And where obviously you said you knew there was a need for all this employee engagement and health and wellness and things like that. So how did this idea for Journey came about, and why you thought this was the next business that should be this should be our next business idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2011, I moved to Australia to open an office for my previous company, for Altrum. Basically, we were expanding. There
Mm-hmm.
was nobody who felt like a logical choice to go. And so I just said, I don't know if I can curse on here. I said, fuck it, I'll go. It was
Mm-hmm.
like, great, okay. And then I was like, oh, this actually makes sense. It allowed me to move out of New York for a time being, right? The plan was to go for 2 months. It ended up being 5 months because it was just such a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic experience. Coincidentally, it was also the winter here and the summer there. But it was just incredible. And it allowed many of our managers who had been with me since basically the start to then level up, because with me gone, obviously the time difference in Australia is pretty significant. And this is
Mm-hmm.
before remote work became a thing, or at least a thing the way it is now. But they had to really step up. So it made a lot of sense from a business standpoint. And for me personally, I was there. And amongst the many things that I discovered, I found meditation through Buddhism. And it was
Mm-hmm.
really helpful for me. It really changed my life. And so when I was trying to figure out what came next, and I realized I want to build something big, I want to do something that matters, I looked at meditation and I thought, okay, this is still pretty misunderstood, mispackaged as religious, difficult, spiritual, confusing. What if we could bring it to people in a really simple, approachable, secular, science based way?
Mm-hmm.
Similar to actually what I did at Altran, put people around me who knew a lot more, people who were deeply studied, people who had been teaching for decades, created this program and then took it out into the world. But the original sort of idea, the seed of the idea came from, I think this practice, which is so transformational for me, would be great for my mom, who's a school teacher in Queens for 30 years, or my brother who works at a hedge fund, but they're not going to pick up a book on Buddhism. But
Mm-hmm.
what is a way to make it more approachable? And since then, in the 8 years, we've of course expanded from meditation into a whole host of other modalities: cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, breath work, journaling, etc. Because we found that different folks resonate with different things, and we're good with that, right? As long as people have the tools to take care of their mental and emotional well-being, we're good. So we're not. It doesn't have to be this way. It could be a whole bunch of ways. But that was the genesis of the idea.
So obviously you had a lot of experience building a product company, and you've seen ways that you can scale and grow. And obviously it's got its own challenges in building a product company. Like you had to deal with the material costs and all sorts of other stuff that comes along with logistics. There's more things that can go wrong when you're building a product company. There's a lot of capital expenditure as well. Then on to build a SaaS plus some sort of a service company, where there's probably a lot of upfront cost with nothing to show forth from some time, right? You got to build this application, you have to build community of users and customers, and then also the therapist. There's a lot that goes into it. So how was that experience of going from having built a product company and successfully exited to building this service company? What were some of the unique challenges that you ran into?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When I started Journey, I said, I don't know if this is going to be a thing or not. I have no idea if this is going to work, but let me start where I am. And by that, I had experience with B2B. That was what I knew. I knew how to work with HR. I knew how to work with companies. And so we started by providing services on site back when people worked on site. We had a whole host of teachers that would go on site to companies. Our first client was Warby Parker. Our second was Time Warner. We worked with lots of companies, big and small, going on site and teaching meditation and other mental health services, right? Fantastic. I had self-funded. Then about a year, and I said, you know what? I think there's an idea here. I think there's something here that I should raise money for. So I went and I raised friends and family round. And to go and ask your friends and family for money is an interesting thing, which is, I say that because for me personally, looking back on that time, I was probably more conservative with the money than I should have been or now am, because of the fact that it was my brother's money, some of my best friends, etc. Long and short, once I had that, then I said, okay, I think there's something to build here. So started building it, but hadn't built any real tech ourselves. We worked with a consulting firm, we built a few things, but it was really once we started to see some traction, I went and raised an institutional round. So I raised the seed round led by Canaan Partners, along with BetaWorks and Brooklyn Bridge Ventures and a whole bunch of other great early stage VCs. That's when we hired a VP of engineering, a VP of product, and then started really building out that. But prior to that, it was much more on the service side. And so then it was maybe 2 years in, I guess 2016 was when we raised the seed, and then have been building SaaS. And so one of the charts that we look at on an annual basis, we look at it quarterly, but really we reflect on it more annually, is the pie chart of where our revenue's coming from. And back in the day, it was 100% service, and now it's, I don't know if it's 100% SaaS, but it's 98% SaaS. It's like a much higher piece of what we're doing because we've continued to build that and then complementing the SaaS with service. I don't know if there's an easy path. Like people ask me like, oh, what's easier, B2B or B2C? Because we did consumer for quite a while. I don't think one's easier. I don't know if service is better than SaaS, which is better than but I think it's important as an entrepreneur to know where your skills lie, because that was one of the lessons for me. When we were doing a lot of consumer stuff, it was super fascinating for me because I was learning every day. Every day was like, wow, this is really interesting. But I didn't have anything to pull from because I had built a B2B business for 12 years. And so while it was interesting and exciting, I couldn't leverage the same set of learnings. And then when we said, you know what, let's focus solely on B2B, that's when the company really started to grow and excel.
Yeah. And I think, like kind of said earlier in the conversation, I was saying, like, when you got into it in the 2015, yeah, there is a need for all along, right? People need mental health, but it was never, I don't think it was the forefront of most businesses' mind that this is an actual challenge business to have, right? They just have employees, they just do their job and go home. You got a mental problem, deal with it at home, not at work, right? So have you seen that shift happening while you were building this company? Have you seen that becoming more and more of a prominent discussion topic in the HR front and also in the business leadership front?
Absolutely. So it started before the pandemic, but was tremendously accelerated as a result of it. So prior to the pandemic, you had companies like Calm and Headspace that were at that point already unicorns and were doing quite well. And it was in the zeitgeist. You heard people talking about meditation and mental health and this and that. But then it was the pandemic where companies said, hey, we now realize that we can't have mental, emotional, behavioral health as a secondary, tertiary priority, especially in the world we're living in today, right? Where most employees have to think. We're not in a society where we're on a factory line for the most part and we're just doing one little thing, right? And even in that case, you still need employees who are reliable, who are thinking, who are showing up as their best selves, because there's safety challenges and things like that. So anyway, companies now went from what felt like a lot of, hey, we know this is important, but we don't have money or we don't have executive buy-in, to, hey, this is a number one or number two priority for us because we know the importance of employee mental well-being and we're feeling the effects. People are burning out. People are turning over. Healthcare costs are rising. So we need to take steps. And the pandemic was terrible for a ton of reasons. And obviously, as with any terrible thing, there are still some silver linings, right? People got to spend time with their kids because they were working at home in a way that they hadn't. One of the other silver linings is people and organizations realize the importance of mental health now much more than ever. Stigma is being reduced. Naomi Osaka, or I was going to say Prince Harry, but I guess he's not Prince Harry anymore. You see him talking about his mental health issues, right? People are talking about it in a much different way than they did 5 years ago, even 3 years ago. There's much more awareness and accessibility, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned when you were raising money from your family and friends, you were much more conservative with that money because you obviously had to face those people on a regular basis. So you couldn't just go waste it. But you said once you started raising institutional capital, you were actually being more aggressive. And one of the things that I heard you say, you were able to hire the product engineers and some other heads of different departments to really scale that growth. What were some of the things that you did conservatively that you wish you didn't do and that you could have done different?
Everything. It was, if you're running a business, there's a certain amount of risk that you need to be willing to take that's safe and appropriate. It's not, let's go and lever the whole thing up and be the next company that goes out of business really quickly. But you also can't be on the other side where you're holding on to every dollar so tightly as if it's the last. So whether it's investment in technology, probably should have done that sooner. Hiring more experienced people. I was very lucky in that several of the people who I hired who did not have much experience ended up being amazing employees and friends, actually. One of them was at my wedding. One of them I caught up with the other day. Great people. But at the same time, we, both of them and myself, would have been very well served to have a few experts, not just working as advisors or consultants, but in the business, right? I think those are some of the areas where if I could go back and do it again, I would have invested, especially as a solo founder. I mentioned how important my previous partners, Brian and Bernard, were at my other company. Would have been the same thing here, even if I hadn't gone and said, hey, I need a co-founder, because I never really felt that way. Not that I couldn't benefit from it, but I never felt like a yearning or missing piece there. I do think we would have been well served had there been a few other experienced operators.
So based on the experience that you had and now obviously the way you've explained your journey of building multiple businesses, I couldn't say you're like a technical founder with a lot of coding experience. So you're more like a operator, visionary guy with great ideas, but you need a lot of people around. So like how was the building a tech product in a SaaS is a completely different ballgame, right? So how was that big shift? And then how did you fuel the growth that needed to fund that, especially after you've had built a software? Because you said you went from 100% service revenue, now almost 100% is SaaS revenue, which is a completely different business model altogether.
Yeah, I was very aware of my shortcomings. And that's, if we want to get like a layer or two deeper, that's both helpful in the business standpoint, but also not always so helpful from a happiness standpoint, right? There's a certain balance around acknowledging and recognizing where your strengths and weaknesses are. But from a humility standpoint, I don't know anything about tech. Like even now, like when my TV goes off, my wife fixes it. Like I'm just not the guy. But I knew that. And so that self-awareness allowed me to say, okay, first, while I'm raising money, nobody's just going to give me the money because I built and sold a previous company and I have a little bit of traction here. If I'm building a SaaS company, a tech company, I need to have people who have experience with SaaS and tech. So I went and I recruited a bunch of advisors and a bunch of consultants who could give me good advice and credibility. Again, as I said, had I hired one or two people full-time, that probably would have accelerated our growth, but you never know. Nowadays, we have a CTO who's a genius. We have a head of product who's fantastic. We have, forget advisors, we have a full team of engineers full-time in-house. We just added a new product person. We're hiring. So there's so much experience there. And for me at this point, like I've learned a lot. It's been 8 years doing this. And so lots of reading, lots of podcasts, like learning from guests of yours, learning from other people, making mistakes, right? Like just being a student to the game. And also we have some really thoughtful investors who are very helpful. So bouncing ideas off them sometimes, having advisors. I think we've been fortunate in that we've been able to get a bunch of advisors who are like incredibly experienced, capable, like big names in the space because we're a mission-based company, because we're doing important work, because we're supporting companies like Walgreens and Amex and Sony, but then we're also supporting the Harlem Children's Zone or the Anti-Defamation League. So, people see this company doing important work. And we also work with nonprofits. So, for example, there's an organization called the Loveland Foundation, which provides free therapy to Black women and girls. There's a shortage of Black therapists. And so there's this huge waiting list to get on or to be able to see someone. So we committed to representation when I started the company. So over 50% of our teachers are teachers of color. We have content that's specific based on your identity, race, life stage, et cetera. And so we said, let's partner with the Loveland Foundation to give away free memberships to our platform so that all those people on the wait list and all those ones seeing a therapist have access to these tools completely for free. So anyway, going back to your question, I just made a lot of mistakes along the way, but not enough to sink us. So that's good. And we're now at a place where we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest important characteristic of a leader is the sense of humility, right? Not just some false humility, but knowing really what you are not good at and recognizing it, and then trying to find people who are probably the best person to fill the void or fill that gap. So what's like your leadership style that you practice as a leader running this fast growing tech service company?
I think my team knows that I care deeply about them as human beings, like first and foremost. And I'm deeply committed to the company and to growing the business and to growing it in the right way, treating people well, making sure we have an environment that supports their personal and professional growth, that allows them to have opportunities. And in order for us to be a sustainable business, in order for us to be a company that somebody's going to come along in a year, 2 years, 3 years, what have you, and say, hey, I want to buy this, which will obviously be a very nice event for myself, my colleagues, financially, from a resume standpoint, right? We need to grow. So we tripled we tripled 2 years ago. We doubled last year. This year's off to a really good start. So we're doing that. And to have a business that's high growth, to me, I want to make sure it's still a place where people feel a lot of psychological safety and they feel like they can meet their full self. One of our values is truth through safety and courage, right? So it's truth because at the end of the day, if people don't speak the truth, their truth, it's hard to make the best decisions, right? But the only way you can have that truth is if there's safety, right? You and I feel safe to say things that might be a different opinion from the CEO, the CFO, whomever, and courage, being able to take that step. So my leadership style is one where I'm very hard charging. I'm very demanding. I know that. I also try to bring a lot of like humor and lightness to work, but I care deeply. So it's something where I want people to feel like this is a place where I was cared for. I learned, I grew, I was stretched, and I was supported.
You brought up decision making and having a safe place where you can make decisions. And you clearly had to make some serious decisions all along the way in the last 2 or 3 businesses you've built. So is there some sort of a decision making criteria that you have that you use to make some tough decisions?
So my investors will sometimes knock me for this, but I think it's or tease me probably more than they knock me. I will go and get a number of opinions from people who have been there before. And the reason they knock me is, as with what I said before about being too conservative or being too risky, there is a balance between, hey, I'm handicapped and I can't make any decisions because I'm asking everyone, or I'm not giving this any thought and I'm just making decisions. So some of the things I like to do, number one, I journal. So on the weekends, usually Saturday morning, I will sit and write essentially a state of the company for myself. I don't share it, but it's basically just going, what are my thoughts? How am I feeling? How's my leadership? How's our strategy? How's each department doing? And that process helps me a lot to get everything that's bouncing around in here out. The other thing is I have a very consistent and important to me meditation practice. And oftentimes I'm sitting there and different thoughts will come up and I'll be just trying to observe what's happening. And if my gut is telling me, hey, this decision feels right or wrong or anything like that, that's also important to tap into. So with both of those, both the writing and the meditation, it's really important that there's some, for me, element of stillness and quiet to be able to see what's really happening. And even with that, we make the best decisions we can. We talk to people that have been here, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. But for the most part, that's really served me.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about, I've seen entrepreneurs where there's a decision based on committee and they can't make any decision without so many people's input. And then all you have is a bunch of ideas with no one taking a decision. It's so frustrating sometimes. Okay, just take a stand and move on, because just not taking it and being indecisive, it actually is only costing you more money.
To that point, one of our other values is speed wins. And the reason is you can spend a lot of time talking and thinking and this and that, but as an early stage company, which we still fancy ourselves as, we need to move. And part of getting people to move quickly is knowing that they're safe. If it's, hey, I can't move quickly because if I make a mistake, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to get reprimanded, I'm going to get shamed, people aren't going to feel good. But if they're made to feel, hey, there's nothing that I'm going to do that's going to sink the company, I know that my manager or Stephen or whomever has my back, then I can move quickly. So I'm with you on the speed.
Yeah, I think Amazon still have that practice of day one, I think they call it, right? Where they're treating us every day as a day one. And in the same way, I think even Tesla and Elon, he also encourages people to take risks. And he said the reward shouldn't be consequences the size of the failure. It should only be encouraging more tests and failures, because that way people are innovating, because he doesn't want people just being comfortable in where they are. So it's important. But you mentioned you are able to do some sort of a self-reflection of the company's state. But is there some sort of a standing meeting you have with the key leadership of the organization that giving you that feedback of where the company is, and how are you getting that firsthand data on where you see is the company today and the strategy and all of those things that you've mentioned?
Yeah. So at my previous company, my partner Bernard, who I mentioned, used to joke that I have long arms. And the joke was that even with team members in Taiwan and Canada and Australia, I was in touch with a lot of people a lot of the time. Now it's much easier. Like, we're on Slack. We're fully remote. There's team members that I've never met in real life. But to answer your question specifically, we have a standing XLT executive team stand-up. So every morning we have a stand-up. So we meet for 10 minutes, do a quick check-in. We do off-sites every quarter. I should probably go in order. I'm probably jumping around. So let me do it. So first we have the standing ups, the daily stand-ups. Then we have a Monday afternoon management meeting. Then we have a Wednesday afternoon brainstorm. And then we have a quarterly offsite where we get together in real life and do a deep dive into what happened in that quarter and plan ahead. Now that's with the executive team. I am in, I would say, weekly, meaning a couple times a week, communication with almost every member of the team to check in. Almost always on Slack. We also have a company meeting where you have all the faces. We're about 25 now full time. That's obviously not including all the teachers and therapists and all that stuff, but full time. We start the meeting with a check-in. So how are you doing? I'm doing great. One woman shared this past weekend she had to put her dog down. So obviously she was emotional about that. So everyone sent her love. Somebody else took their kid to a carnival. Super casual, right? We're not talking about work, but it allows the work to flow, right? You'd look at that and be like, that's a waste of 15 minutes taking all that time. But actually that greases the wheels so that people can feel safe, can feel like they can trust each other. Yeah, we have a lot of formal meetings, and then there's also informal things. So there's a bi-weekly lunch that people stop by, again, on Zoom. There's a number of those things.
Are you using some sort of a system like EOS or the Entrepreneur's Operating System, or Scale, or any of those sort of a business operating system to run any of these? Or you just build a structure to have these sort of meetings and have some sort of a KPI that they report on every time you guys are talking?
Yeah, the latter. I took things. There was a book called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. I want to say it's Vern Harnish, but it was a book that I read. Yeah, he wrote it, right? I read it.
Scaling Up. He also wrote the book Scaling Up, which also has the scaling up systems. Yeah, and then they have the...
So I remember reading this. It must have been 2012. And I was blown away. I was like, this makes so much sense.
Stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and so I took that and I applied it to, at the time, to Altrum in terms of meeting cadence and things like that. And then I applied it to Journey. But it wasn't, hey, we're going to take this whole thing and apply it. It's what are the things that are relevant for us based on stage, industry, what feels right. And so we have our own version of that, but it definitely takes inspiration from a lot of things. There was a time where we were going to roll out OKRs, and then we said, you know what, there's a simpler way for us to do this. And so we do that. So we have our priorities, we report on them red, yellow, green every month. We report on them weekly, so it's monthly priorities, and then we share that with the company. So we have different versions of how we do it. So it's not necessarily like we took this out of the box. We have drawn inspiration from a number of things.
Makes sense. So obviously as a leader, like you said, you have a lot of things going on, multiple meetings throughout the day. You're building a company, growing it, all sorts of stuff, I'm sure, with the investor meetings and things like that, reporting back to them how the company is growing. So you got a lot to get done. So are there any sort of a productivity hacks that you have in terms of how you stay focused and get things done?
Absolutely. So I block out the first several hours of my day as priority number one. So everyone has access to my calendar. Now, the truth is that things will sometimes get booked over it, whether it's I'm going to the doctor with my wife or there's a client, that's the only time they can call. But for the most part, I'd say 3 out of 5 days, my morning. So let's say I wake up at 7:30 or 8 or whatever time, have my morning meditation, and then I'll work uninterrupted-ish until today's first meeting was at 11. Tomorrow, I think it's at noon. And it gives me time to think, and it gives me time to work on what's most important. Because once the day starts and once the calls start, especially because I'm still very much involved in sales, it's very rapid fire. There's just a lot happening. And then by the end of the day, I'm just too tired to do any thinking work. I can do lots of cleanup work. I can send emails. But having that beginning of the day is super helpful. Now, for other people, the productivity hack might be the opposite. It might be they get the most energy at night. It might be they get the most energy right after they go to the gym. But I will say the other thing is I am in at this point a pretty good place, and I've never thought I'd say this, but with all of my self-care practices. So I eat really healthy, but not obsessed with it. I used to be really heavy. I lost 85 pounds. And so my relationship with food was very dysfunctional for a long time, but it's really good now. My meditation practice is good. I go to the gym consistently, but not I'm going to the gym and I'm spending 2 hours. I'm just going to be consistent. And so between getting a good night's sleep, eating well, that's a very unsexy productivity hack. But I think the sleep for me is the key thing. That's the sort of the thing that has the biggest impact, because if I'm not sleeping well, then all of those other things, I don't eat really healthy. I'll eat crappy because I'll crave greasy food or carbs. Then I won't go to the gym, and then it just all spirals down from there. So that's my productivity hack. Again, not very sexy.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Very simple things that actually have a ripple effect on everything else. Like you said, it starts with the sleep that actually can play a big part in what you bring to the day, right? With your energy level and your attitude and everything else. And then you skip the gym, and then all of a sudden, I do know when I exercise regularly that I am more selective about what I put into my body too. You don't want to just eat any sort of junk that you see, because you start thinking oh man, if I eat this donut, I got to spend another 40 minutes, right? So you're being a little bit more cautious about it. So obviously you've learned a lot over the years as having built companies, and you have a lot of lessons learned and probably a lot of mistakes that can show those wounds and what those means. But having gone through all this, what you've been through so far, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know today?
I think I'd probably say you're good. You're good as is. You're whole. It's less a business advice, although we show up at work and at home. It's more a life advice, which is a lot of the things I did where I was very hard charging and I was doing all these things, but maybe the reason for some of it was because I felt less than. I felt like I wasn't making as much money as my friends, or I would be loved by a female if I had more or was more. And I think the advice that I would give, now I'm 44, the advice I would give my 24-year-old self is you're good. Just give him a hug and be you're okay.
It's a great advice to end our conversation. Certainly enjoyed our conversation, Stephen. Thank you for sharing your life lessons and wisdom with our audience.
Yeah, it was good seeing you, Sam.
If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.